Before we begin the book study, I'd like to review some expectations. This book study was designed to be interactive and engaging. We encourage you to ask questions, share your thoughts, and participate in the discussion throughout the session. We want this to be a collaborative learning experience for everyone involved. To ensure smooth operation, please be mindful of these norms. Remember that participation in all 4 sessions will satisfy your annual
He's
training.
back.
Please.
He's hanging out down there.
Is she jelly?
Hello.
Are you all peanut butter and jelly?
Sorry. Live presentations. If you're coming in, make sure that you're muted, please. Participation in all 4 sessions does meet your annual training requirement. I will enter a sign-in form as proof of your attendance today in the chat. Today's video is recorded, and please ensure that your video feed is not distracting should you keep it on. Please keep your audio muted unless you're asking a question. Please use the hand-raising icon to gain the presenter's attention to ask a question. Remember that the chat function is available for question asking, but it is also part of the recorded content. At the end of the webinar, a link will be added to the chat for you to provide feedback about the webinar. Those comments are anonymous. Thanks again for joining us today, and now I would like to invite our speakers to begin their presentation.
Great, thanks, Zach. I wanted to pause for a second. Did you want to touch base about the graduation?
Yes. Sorry, it wasn't in my list of notes to cover. So yesterday, most of you probably know that the school report card went live, and I'm excited that our graduation rate went up again. It went from 87.4, 87.4 to 88.3. So it's a great trajectory. 3 years ago, when the National Center for Homeless Education last compared all states, the top state had a 91.4% graduation rate. So it's just a lot of great work. Remember, the number one predictor of adult homelessness is not having a diploma from graduating high school. So I just wanted to celebrate that success before we get started.
Thanks, Zach. And I just want to congratulate you and everyone on the call and all of your colleagues across the state. That's just so incredible. And we were talking just before the webinar started, when you break that down to the number of students, it's so many more students and families and communities that are really having opportunities. So yeah, continue to celebrate that success. We wanted to start by giving people a chance. You can either raise your hand or put it in the chat to see if you had any questions from the last webinar, if you had things you wanted to follow up on. Feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to introduce you to a colleague that I'm bringing along with me, Dr. Anna Velis. We have known each other for a very long time. And when Linda and I were looking at doing the second version of this book, one of the things we recognized was missing was really a discussion about how to collaborate with your community and how to kind of expand the focus of support to students and really add the element of family, guardians, and community to that. And that's really Anne's expertise. She's an associate professor at the University of Delaware, but I want to give you a chance, Anne, to introduce yourself before we start with the webinar today.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm really grateful to be here. As Ron said, my name is Anne Aviles, and I'm an associate professor at University of Delaware. I have been working on issues related to homelessness, housing instability for children and families since, I'm going to age myself here, but it's all good, since about 1999, working with families who were experiencing homelessness due to domestic violence, unaccompanied youth. So I'm really just excited and want to echo the congratulations that you all are doing some amazing work here. So I'm really glad to be here with you all today to think about how you can further improve the work you guys are already doing. So thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to our session today.
Excellent. Thanks, Anne. And like her first book that she wrote really emphasizes the importance of kind of moving away from like the luck of students finding opportunities and the work of teachers to put it together, food banks and things like that for students, and really looking at how do we create change so that all students at our schools and our communities really benefit from it. So just excited for you to get a chance to engage with her and her expertise. So we already mentioned this. If you do have questions from the first session, or as Zach mentioned throughout our conversation, both Anna and I can sometimes get really talking fast, but please interrupt us. Or not interrupt, please engage with us through the chat, or raise your hand to chat with us, because we want this to be as useful and as engaging as possible, which I know is sometimes a little tricky on video conferences. I want to circle back to our first conversation that we had back in August, I believe, where I presented this idea of the ecology of promise norms. And just as a very quick recap, this idea of seeing the promise in students, but also making the promise to students that when you're part of our educational institutions, that we're really going to do what we can to support you. And I know that's a commitment that you all have across the state, just looking at the improvement in graduation rates, as well as other indicators in Kentucky. You can just tell that you really have that commitment. Today, we're going to center on a couple of these norms. One is the engagement with students of how to really be holistic in providing support that kind of wraps around the students. And to a lesser degree, the proactive, developmental, and strengths-oriented, but really we're going to look at how do we be holistic. And then on the other side is the collaborative. And a lot of what we've talked to you about up to this point is how do you collaborate within a school. We had Dr. Skirla last time talk about how do you engage with leaders, and also the PLC element of it. How do we learn together? What Anne is going to really bring to this conversation is how do we collaborate with the community that's around us to provide support. And I've already heard from Zach, and when I was actually in Kentucky a couple, I think last year or the year before, that you are already doing some of this work. So we hope on another way to do it, and to give you some ideas of how do you really engage, even identify who might be the people you could work with, or the communities you could work with within your district or a school site. Some of this will be useful for you as you're thinking about your whole area that you serve, and some will also be useful as you're working directly with a school of what tools or resources or activities could you provide for them as they engage. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anne to give kind of an overview of the session objectives. We're going to do a bit of McKinney-Vento of like, does McKinney-Vento talk about doing community work and engaging? And then transition into some of the research and some of the ways that you can do this community engagement. All right. Anne?
Thanks so much. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. So as Ron said, I just want to echo that please feel free to jump in, put things in the chat so that we can make this as useful to you all as possible. So my goal today, because I know this is 3 of 4, so I know you have a good foundation and you've been talking about the different aspects of the book, is to really increase our awareness of these community resources. It can be challenging when a lot of the work, right, is happening in the school, which is very appropriate. And so really thinking about how can we partner or leverage what already exists, because schools can't do it all, right? And our focus is more on students' academic needs. So how do we leverage the community resources to meet their other basic needs? So part of that process will be thinking about this community asset map, which is basically a way to identify systematically what are the resources in the community that can help students and their families. And then finally, and it sounds like you guys are already doing a lot of this, and so maybe it might be more about sustainability, but really cultivating what I like to think of as communal care, and then the sustainability, right? We know that schools are embedded within communities. And so how do we, again, build on those community resources and the many assets that exist within them? So I'm not going to read all of this, but I just think it's important for folks to see the language of McKinney-Vento. And I want to highlight here, right, one of the local educational agency requirements is to implement a coordinated system, right, and to provide these necessary services, which include transportation and other services that might not be directly in the realm of the school, but we know has an impact on students' readiness to learn and engage once they're actually in our schools and classrooms. I'm sure, right, you all have talked about this quite a bit, your state plan. And so we know that McKinney-Vento, right, has these requirements in place ultimately to support young people. And again, I just want to reiterate, it's so amazing that you all are continuing to increase the number of students that graduate, right? That's huge in helping them to then achieve sustainable lives as they move forward. In terms of these other requirements, here I just want to highlight these this provision of services. So actually, let me pause really quickly. So McKinney-Vento, I know, is like a long, drawn-out policy, and so I just pulled some excerpts here. And this one that we're going to focus on for the partnership or community collaboration is this coordination, right? And so each local agency should coordinate these provision of services, which includes other acts. So we want to think about other aspects of students' lives. Maybe they are Title I, right? Maybe they are an unaccompanied youth. And so are there other either policies or programs, again, that we can leverage to support their learning? And then this piece, again, in terms of the coordination, focuses more on this housing assistance. Now, I want to say this is, again, schools cannot do it all. And as Ron said, that was when I worked on my dissertation, that was one of my findings, right? That so much is put on teachers and schools. And so how can McKinney-Vento help alleviate some of those non-school aspects like housing and other related support services that you simply do not have the time to dedicate? But there's agencies, right, within the community that is their focus. And so how can you partner with them or strengthen your partnerships with them in order to meet those subsistence needs of students? Again, because we know that it impacts their learning once they're actually in the classroom. Another part, right, of the section, again, is these referrals. So, sorry, y'all, I'm toggling a little bit back and forth here between my notes. So really thinking about these outreach and coordination activities, which can include Head Start programs, as you saw on the previous slide, Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, and students with disabilities, right? Because we know that our young people are students first, right? And they may have other identities, right? If they're young children, they might be in a Head Start program. If they are an unaccompanied youth, they may be part of that Runaway and Homeless Youth Act. If they have a disability, right, they also have needs related to that. And so we know that housing is fundamental to well-being, but there's all the other pieces too that families and students are also working through. In terms of, again, these state plans, I just want to highlight here is that part of our work is to refer. So it's can be very challenging to refer students to services if we don't really know what's around us. And so that is really the focus of today, is to really think about what are our local resources that we can draw upon and build those relationships. Okay, I think we've got this last one. So this last piece, I know transportation is always a huge challenge. A lot of my work has been more in the urban context, but since coming to Delaware, I've focused more on suburban and rural. And what we do know is that in rural communities, it is such a greater challenge, right? Because of just the physical geography and that things are really spread out. So again, it's much harder to coordinate. And so what we're hoping to do today is to give you just some tools that can help you and your schools really think about how to do this again in a systematic way and in a way that doesn't create more burden. I don't like to use that word, but more work again for the educators because you're focused on their learning. So a lot of these approaches, right, to thinking about this development or strengthening of community partnerships, these are some of what I call like the principles, is how do we identify the folks that we can partner with or that we're already partnering with? How can we really incorporate the voice of people with lived experience, right? We know that many of our students and their families, they're the ones having to navigate all of these systems. And so getting their input on, well, what are your needs and how can we, again, identify these local resources to meet those subsistence needs? So I think about it also as a continuum. You can incorporate maybe through a survey. That's a little bit different than centering, which does quite honestly take a little more work, right? Because spending time with a person who is not stably housed, it can be very hard for them to focus on these other needs when they're maybe in crisis. And so again, how can we partner with others to help incorporate some of that? And then finally, what are some resources, financial resources that we might be able to draw upon when we work with our community partners, identifying grants at the local, state, and federal levels?
And before you go on to the next
Yes,
slide,
I was going to do a quick pause. Great.
Yeah,
Awesome.
perfect.
Go for it.
The first group of slides that you saw, you'll see that there's a lot of information on there. And Anne, you did such a great job of giving an overview. The reason we wanted to provide more information is in case you're ever in a position where you did want to dig more deeply or you did need the information to persuade someone that engaging with the community was important, it was connected to these other policies. We wanted to make sure that you had it, but we just wanted to give kind of a broad overview. If there are any questions, though, about the aspects of the policy that have been presented, feel free to let us know or raise a question. We're happy to chat more about it. But that's why you'd see so much information in the first group of slides, is we're hoping you have that for later.
And I'll just add, if anybody's ever in a position where you're worried about defending whether or not it's part of your work, you can always reach out to me. If you ever have that tension locally, I'm happy to kind of be an extra voice if you ever need that. That's part of my job description anyway, so thanks.
Excellent. And I know that it's in your state plan too to have this sort of engagement. And so I don't think the slides are moving forward when you push them, so I'm trying to do that. So if you'll just give me prompts to make sure that I'm moving the slides at the right time.
Yes, sorry, I thought I was moving them. Okay. Okay, so yeah, thank you. I was going to say I wanted to pause because I know that's a lot of text. But as Ron said, we really just want to provide people with the tools and information to help right with this work. So hopefully the next set of slides are less wordy and we're going to get more into the how-to and thinking about ways that we can develop a community map. So I'm just going to briefly talk about community mapping. It's really an opportunity for teachers, staff, and others to physically look at what are the resources that surround your community, either physical resources and or even virtual resources, right? I think we've shifted from always being right in person as we are today virtual. And so also thinking about what are some of the resources that you can access virtually to, again, assist and support with this work. So when we think about community mapping, we want to think about, right, what is the lay of the land? And you all can decide, right? And I think it's really important that schools and teachers and others recognize, like, well, what are the parameters of our community? And not in a kind of us them way, but just to recognize, okay, here's what's within kind of the bounds. But also it can help for future collaboration if it's outside of the bounds, right? In terms of maybe the, excuse me, local food pantry is outside of your school, your designated school area. And just knowing that is a resource, right? So that when families maybe come for those kinds of services, you can let them know, okay, this is where you have to go. And then again, that coordination piece can really be thinking about how do we work together to make sure that we get them the access they need. I also want to recognize here that while our focus is on students, we know that students are part of families, right? And so what happens in the home definitely impacts how then children come to school and are ready or not to engage in the learning process. And so these partnerships can really help provide the stability and support that families need so that they can better support their students. And when their students come to school, they're better prepared, right, to engage in the learning. So what is,
I'm sorry. I also have been really inspired by some of the work that you're all doing in Kentucky. Like, we're showing the image here of Kentucky, but I also know that sometimes you have to cross state boundaries and do coordination that's beyond even not just your county. A lot of my work has been in Los Angeles, which is nowhere near another state. It's just really thinking over county lines, and I've just been really interested in how some of the work that you all are doing is actually looking even broader of what community can mean and finding those ways to collaborate with people that want to do the good work.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Ron. I'm in Delaware, and I know that our state coordinator, Dr. Yu, he has said this year she has seen an increase in students coming from like Maryland and Pennsylvania, right? And so I think when you're in these more, again, like rural areas, that there is this blurring. And so how can you develop those partnerships to make the process go a little smoother for you and your students?
I think in particular, we see it in Northern Kentucky. Somebody from there may be able to speak to that. Also, Louisville across the river from Indiana, there are a lot of students that move back and forth as well. Maybe if someone from either area wanted to share.
I'm sorry, could you just repeat that question, Zach? I got interrupted and I didn't hear the last question.
I think they were asking about ways to coordinate across state lines through any community awareness or opportunities, community resources.
This is Lori from Covington Schools in Covington, Kentucky. And what we do is, well, we have our Northern Kentucky Collaborative that is pretty strong. We meet once a month. And then we have reached out to Cincinnati Public, which is right across the way. We use them to if we're having transportation issues, enrollment issues with kids who are wanting to go ahead and enroll in Cincinnati Public and choose School of Residence. We work with them to do a referral. When we were at the national conference, Cincinnati Public Project Connect has indicated they have a referral process online now. So you can type up a referral, send it to them, and let them know that they have a student in their area. We do try to work with them on cross-district transportation. It can be problematic at times just because of the different state laws with transportation. But overall, we have found that sometimes if we end up doing both ways, then they will do both ways for their kids, and we kind of just communicate and make sure that we're keeping things fair. But other than that, I mean, as far as cross-district within our district, within the state of Kentucky, again, it's having those, like you talk about, collaborations with other liaisons and having the ability to just pick up the phone, text them, or call them and say, you know, we have a student that's in the area and we would like to do some cross-district collaboration. And we have a link in our Northern Kentucky Collaborative Drive where we can type something up and send it to the other liaison so they have all the information to start working on their ends of the transportation piece. I'm guess that's covering what you wanted to hear.
Thank you so much for that, Lori. I really appreciate it. And you're reminding me of a conversation I know Ron and I had as we were talking through, right? Sharing is, we know that McKinney-Vento historically has been underfunded. And that's, again, why these collaborations can be really important, because I agree that it can be challenging, especially when different states or districts, regions, right, have different rules or different funding sources. And so it can turn into like a fight for resources, and our goal here is to say, like, okay, we know that resources can be slim, and so what are ways that we can better coordinate and collaborate, knowing that we need more funding, right, to support the needs of our students. So thank you for sharing that. So in terms of community mapping, as I kind of highlighted a couple slides ago, is it's really identifying these current and potential partners. It's leveraging the knowledge and relationships. I think, Lori, that's a great example, right? Having these relationships makes all the difference. Being able to pick up the phone, being able to send a message, and it isn't this, it isn't a quote unquote stranger on the other end, but someone you've built some community and relationship with. It's also thinking about what are the gaps that exist. As I said, because we know that funding often falls short, how can we leverage, again, our community partners to stand in the gap, right? To fill those gaps. And then finally, really developing a plan that is sustainable, because one of the challenges, and I'm sure many of you know this better than us, is once that person leaves, then you have to kind of start from scratch, right? Build those relationships from the beginning. And so how can we think about structures that allow people to kind of plug in as folks kind of move in and out of positions?
And I want to go back to that second point for just a second, because Anne's going to go into detail about how to do this. When you think about a school site might have 20 different people working there, from the food staff to the teachers, paraprofessionals, office staff. You might even have more like 50, depending on how big your campus is. It's really thinking about, who does each person know? They might know someone that works at a food bank. They might know someone that is connected to a church or a synagogue. They might know, and just really, we're going to walk through this process, but like, what does everyone in your school know? And who do they know? And start mapping that out so you can start thinking around building those connections and building that map without necessarily creating a ton of labor of everyone going out and investigating. You kind of start with, who do we already know, and what relationships could we leverage?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So this is, and I think you all might, oh, I see a question or a hand raised.
Yep, Shelley.
Hi, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the point of partnerships and who knows whom and all those things. And I think that schools really need to look at those services like a business would. And I feel like our district or schools in general, really, they don't take that approach. We have a really small administration in our district. We only have 2,400 students, but we have our FRIS that are going out and forming the partnerships and getting these donations. We have myself, we have the nurses, we have all kinds of people that know each other. And I think that one of the things that I'd like to develop for our district is just a universal, I guess, directory, so that we know who's contributing what to whom, who's connected to whom, because I don't, I feel like when people leave their positions, so to do their partnerships, right? And so with Google and all this stuff, I've really advocated here to try to get those that universal directory of givers, I would say, and treat it more like a business. And because we're also want to send the same messages. Sorry, I'm in the hallway here. My office is being used. It's a little noisy. And so, yeah, so I think that we want to send the same messaging. We want to, cultivate those relationships. And I think it takes all of us to do that. And so many times we're working in silos, right? Or we're asking the same people for things because we don't know what the right hand is doing, right?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to point that out.
No, that's Shelley. Thank you for that. That's such a good point. And I think education is very guilty of this siloed work, which is why. So it's definitely not a Kentucky thing. I would say it's just across the globe, really. And this is why we really want to think about, as you said, in a more systematic way. How do we build it so that we aren't recreating it every time, right? People shift or change. So thank you for that.
And I think you've set us up very nicely, Shelley. We're gonna kind of community mapping could give you that list, but it would also give you, and I think Anne's gonna point this out, who are we not already reaching out to that we know? So it can give you that index of who you're already engaging with, but also ideas and the relationships that already exist that might be able to facilitate that connection too.
Yeah. So I have here, and I believe you all received this as part of today. I'm not 100%, but this comes directly from the book, where it really just, it's one of the appendices, and it just is a visual of, okay, how do we, again, center the school? I really think about schools as anchors of the community because, one, they're compulsory, right? Everybody has to go to school. And so everything else is kind of optional for, at least for the children. And so we know that when for youth development, child development, home and school are those two primary anchors. And when home is not serving as that anchor, schools become even more vital. So again, we're not saying schools have to do it all, but in terms of McKinney-Vento, how can you leverage the language to, right, develop and cultivate these relationships to make things easier for you and your students? So this is just a visual, and I want to think about this again. I keep saying systematically on purpose because I do understand many times, I've worked in a lot of nonprofits and education spaces, and oftentimes families come to us in crisis. And so we're always trying to manage that crisis, and it can be very hard to kind of pause and say, okay, what are all the housing services in our program? Maybe we start there, right? So we don't have to do it all at once, right? We have here listed many like businesses, community institutions. So I don't want folks to be overwhelmed by like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this all? So we start with, if you remember the language, you probably don't, but I pulled some of the language of coordination is health services, which could include dental, mental health, substance use, housing, right? And other services, again, that we know families need for stability to support their students. So you could say, okay, we're going to start with what are all the mental health services within our community? Let's just start there, right? And then slowly build partnerships. And this will happen over time, right? And just to be really honest, and you all again know this, it can take years to really build these strong and sustainable partnerships. And so just continuing to pour in order to really solidify these so that when, again, there's turnover or people go to a different district, everything doesn't kind of fall apart.
And before we go on to the next slide, I just wanted to raise 2 points too as you're thinking about the work you're doing and as you engage with the schools that you support. One is we're going to focus on students experiencing homelessness, but this would actually be beneficial for school to support all of their students, right? To be able to map this. So as you're again thinking about working with leaders, you could really talk about this of being a useful strategy to support all students, right? Definitely students experiencing homelessness and their families are going to benefit. The other potential for this, like when Ann and I were talking about this as we were developing it for the book, I just thought back to when I was an elementary school teacher and we had the monthly professional development. That was usually like half of a day. This could be a really cool activity to do over the course of a year where you really are mapping out like who do we know, who could we connect with, how could we lighten the work that we're doing and continue to support students by thinking about who we already are connected to. And then maybe other people we could connect to that wouldn't take a heavy lift as a starting point. So for any of you that have worked in elementary school, I could just see each of these as being, a piece of chart paper that's on a wall and people going around 1 month and just writing who they know. And then the next month coming back to it and say, well, let's look at this. Where are the gaps? Where are the opportunities? How do we want to continue to support people? Developing the list of resources, but also then thinking, how do we get them to connect and collaborate? And doing that as kind of a full school. I could just envision that happening from some of the work I did when I was a K-12 teacher.
And I wanted to share, we used to do this when I worked in the urban ed program at the University of Tennessee. It's a great use of time. And in addition to like this model, we would offer extra credit if students would figure out how to use public transportation if they had that. To go from like a neighborhood to their school and back. Knoxville has, if you're familiar, has a interstate cutting the town in half from the poorest to the downtown. And for some students, that was an hour, or parents, it would take an hour to get to the school if they were to take the city bus or something like that. So I just can't speak highly enough of this exercise. I think it's really great. And they did get it in their email. If they don't have it, they can email me again to get it.
Okay, great. Great. Yeah, we definitely want this to be useful. So thank you for that. So let me go to our next slide here. So I think you all have done a good job of already talking about the benefits of a community map is really that access to community resources, right? That reduction of the workload. Again, on the front end, there may be more work needed, but then over time, the goal is to reduce that workload. Ultimately, right, we want to improve the outcomes of all of our students. And we know that if you have a student who is struggling in your class or students, it impacts the entire classroom, right? And so we know that supporting students experiencing homelessness is supporting really all students. And you all have talked quite a bit, right, about this coordination and collaboration. And it could potentially even be used to raise funds, right? If there's local organizations already doing some of this work, you don't have to do it all yourself. You can say, hey, you all are doing this thing. Can we partner, right? Here's a way that we might be able to work together. And I do think it's really important because, as I said, even though we're focusing on the student, we know that the conditions of the family and the community can support or limit our student school success. And if students aren't stable because of their housing, or if they don't feel safe because they don't know where they're going to go day to day, it negatively impacts development, cognitive functioning, and their mental health, which then can lead to educational declines, decreased test scores, behavioral challenges, right? This then contributes to teacher stress, increased disciplinary outcomes, right? Lower educator morale. And so it becomes a domino effect. So a lot of this work is we want to think about it as also prevention, right? How do we have schools that are really healthy and thriving for the students, right, who are coming to them? So where do we even start, right? And it sounds like some of you all have already engaged some of this work. We think about it, and I think Ron highlighted this, is can we build this into some of our existing staff or teacher meetings, right? Professional development or other programs that you all are already engaged in. So it doesn't become another meeting you have to attend, right? Does your school already have a professional learning community or other spaces where collaboration occurs? So thinking about this as building or embedding within what is already occurring rather than adding to. So what are the organizations, programs, or local efforts of either individuals or organizations that we can connect with, right? What are the local agencies that are already providing services to families experiencing housing instability? Do relationships already exist, or do they need to be developed? What people, organizations, or other institutions, right, can we, again, partner with? And so it's really, I recommend starting with a specific need instead of trying to do it all at once, right? So if we're saying, okay, we want to know all the food pantries, and so maybe we spend some time in that professional development meeting just saying, okay, here's all the places that we know exist within our community, right? And so once you can see that visually, then you can start to map it out and then build those relationships.
And this can be really useful too for some of the mandates within McKinney-Vento. It's not that the school or district has to pay for all of those things like backpacks and school supplies and uniforms. I've seen schools often start with those sorts of things because they're an expense that you're trying to figure out how to share that. And there's a number, depending on your community, there might be a number of different places that might be willing to raise funds or get donations for backpacks. Or so I like that idea, Anne, of like start with like a need, kind of think of who in the community can help meet that need, and then kind of move on to another. And there's some really useful strategies that people have done to meet those needs and to fulfill those mandates, that also can alleviate some funding to put towards other things like transportation.
Yeah. So thinking about, and I know this is a little bit of a duplicate, but who's in your network already, right? What are the people, places, programs? And I really want to emphasize the people piece as well. I think in communities, there's often that person who's like a lifelong community member and they just know everyone, right? They're the person you go to. I know when I first moved to Delaware, I have a colleague who she's local. And if I was like, I need a dentist or I need, she knew everything. And so sometimes those folks, I think, are overlooked because they don't have a specific position, right, in a community organization. And so thinking about, right, like who are maybe even a parent that has been a lifelong member of the community who might be able to shed some light on the resources that are available. And then who or what is missing, right? And so really thinking again about what are the needs of our students and how can we ensure that we are systematically building this list or directory or map of resources. And then also considering how does McKinney-Vento overlap with other needs of students, right? If they have a disability, this youth and family engagement. I was doing a little digging as I was preparing for today, and I saw that, and you all I'm sure can provide more examples here, but I looked up and it says that Kentucky already has some programs that exist that are really thinking about partnerships with families and communities. So again, how can what already exists within your district or region be further developed, or even just reaching out to them to say, hey, you all provide backpacks every year. Great. Can we either have you come to the school? Oops, sorry, that's my timer to make sure I don't go over too far. So, can we partner with that local community? Or because every year they do this huge backpack drive and they actually are looking for schools to partner with, right? So that you don't have to do all that work. I also want to recognize here that many of us have institutions of higher education, again, that are our neighbors and that are within our community. And so many times there's requirements actually for students to engage in research projects that we refer to as translational, right? So it isn't research for research's sake, but it's really about how can we support the needs of the community, right? And so I know, for example, in our program, we prepare a lot of early childhood educators and human service providers, and they required 50-hour internship that they have to do. And so they're always looking for projects. And so that would be a great project, right? In your professional development, you've listed all the places. Now you have a student who can go and look it all up and find you the information and the contact person. They can make the call to make sure the number still works. I know that one can be a little challenging because sometimes services also come and go. But knowing, hey, we have a partnership now with our local university, and they have students who every semester can come and help us continue to build this work. You can also think about, are there faculty or staff that are looking for partners because they want to apply for some grant funds that will improve educational outcomes or will address, right, teacher training or things of that nature. And so again, how can we leverage that? And finally, thinking about them as like guest speakers or facilitators of your professional development. So what I have here, and we won't, I know we're almost out of time, so I just want to show us, right, that there is a way to just lay it out and to start to think about. And again, I would do this one at a time instead of like, oh my gosh, we have to fill this whole thing out in this one session today, right? But starting with what's the greatest need, and then kind of working backwards from there.
And we don't have this in the book. We made this just for you. So if you wanted to think of something you could pull down as like a template, you could also completely reimagine this. It's not copyrighted or anything. This is just like a starting point. But we thought it might be helpful to have something you could actually fill in if you wanted to like print out and have people, like you could send it home with teachers and they could like sketch ideas and bring it to a meeting or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, there is, I really, thank you for that, Ron. There is no wrong way to do this, right? We all learn differently. And so some of us are more visual, some of us want the big paper, some of us are just like, nope, I'll do it on my computer. So it's really about just coordinating the information, and how you get there is really up to you all in terms of what works best and what makes most sense. So once you develop this map, whether, and again, it doesn't have to be the whole map. You could just say we just focused on housing, right? What are the housing resources so that we can refer families when they need, right, the housing. And so once you've drafted that, then you want to consider, well, what are we missing now, right? Are there services that students and their families consistently ask for that we haven't yet really identified? And so really thinking about who can fill these gaps. What are some existing community events that you can again plug into, and developing that list so that you can really build that collaborative work. This is just an example that I pulled from offline, and it's in Boston, but it's just to show you all, right, how they have begun to map out what are the schools in the area, right? So we can think about who are we partnering with, what are the local centers for our young people, for their families, health, right, housing, all of this. So again, depending on how your school works or your district, right? This could be really helpful just to have that visual, and also to have more what I know they talk about in social services, a warm handoff, right? It really makes a difference, in particular for families that are in crisis because of their housing status, but also unaccompanied youth. A lot of the youth I worked with when I was still in Chicago, because I had been working in the community before working in schools, I was able to say, hey, like, I know there's this local youth center, and so why don't we refer you there? But the youth was really intimidated to like call or go. And so me being able to talk with them to say, hey, I know Miss Morna, who's over at, right, this shelter, why don't we call her together? right? So just that small, 2-minute conversation made all the difference. And so again, having these existing relationships and awareness will also help your students and your families.
And sometimes mapping it like this might also show you a service that's really distant from your campus. And that also might be one of those things where you have a conversation about, well, maybe there's a possibility that service like SNAP or whatever could come to the campus once a month. If that works within the policies of your district or institution, to make it easier for your families and your students to access the services too. So sometimes this mapping geographically can help you see where there might be an obstacle for your local families too.
Yeah, great point. Thanks for that. And we're almost at the end here, and I know we're almost out of time. So I just want to again recognize that this is work, right? And it can be really waning and taxing when we know again our students and their families are in crises and they're coming to us for support. And so, how can we also create communities of care for one another, right? That liaison that you're talking with, or that teacher, or that community partner. I have found in the work that some of my community partners are also my favorite confidants, right? To be like, oh, this is really hard today. And just being able to talk with people about the challenges can also help you, right, in your own sustainability for continuing the work. And so thinking about, are there, again, local events that you can be tapping into? And I mentioned this early on, are there webinars? Are there conferences that are virtual, or even national organizations? I know we were talking at the beginning before we started about the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, right? They have their yearly conference. And so those kinds of spaces can also be opportunities to get support, to get ideas about what other people are doing, and then bringing them back to your home communities to implement them. And yes, congratulations to Zach. We definitely want to shout him out on that one. It's amazing. So my final slide here is also about this sustainability and really thinking about how do we continue to cultivate or build new partnerships for maintenance. Can we invite them to our local talent show or something that's happening, right, as a way to have that mutual aid? I mentioned earlier about the student service hours. I know in many high schools now, right, students are required to have service hours. So can you build a partnership there where you maybe have some of the high school students going and doing some volunteer work at these local agencies as a way, again, to support one another? And then what are some community or collaborative events that you all can do together, right? So maybe like that backpack drive. The school doesn't have to do it, but hey, this community organization, like they really want to give out backpacks, and you're like, hey, we're a school that's happy to get them, right? And so I know there's many times like resource fairs that happen at the beginning of the school year, the middle of the school year. So again, how can we tap into what already exists? And this one is a little more fun one, right? If you have a school band or a dance group, I also want to think about our elders in the community. Many times, right, those older folks are also feeling isolated and alone, and having those relationships for young people who don't or who aren't stably housed, who maybe don't have consistent adults in their lives. This is also a way to build those bridges, and again, for that mutually beneficial outcomes for both the students and the community.
And back to school nights, another time that we could think about. A lot of times that's just the engagement with the teacher. But if we're asking the families to come, maybe there's like in the gym, there's a resource space where people can kind of go and get additional support. So I like the idea of reimagining some of the things we're already doing instead of adding a ton more labor, creating more time and space that's really hard to navigate.
Yeah. And so I know we don't have a lot of time, but just to think about like, what's your takeaway from today? Any approaches, ideas, or collaboration that maybe, has sparked your interest here that you can consider either building or strengthening in order to really support our students and their families?
Awesome.
As we
Well,
come
thank
to
you
the
all.
As we come to the end, I'm going to put a link in the chat. It will include the original sign in, but also the feedback link. And I've also putting a link to the Schoolhouse Connection article from last month about Bullitt County and how they've really leveraged a lot of community resources. If you haven't had a chance to read that, I would take some time to do that. I'm happy I can hang on for like 15 minutes if anybody has questions to continue hosting. Um, I'm actually headed to Bullitt County. They're having a 24-hour outdoor challenge at their central office today, and I'll be going there for a few hours, not the whole night. Um, but yes, with that, if you have any questions, we'll hang around for a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm also happy to hang around if people have questions or want to have further discussion. Thank you all.
And that's a really good idea about setting up with McKinney-Vento information. It's a way that you can braid funding to maybe McKinney-Vento or Title I funding could be used to provide tutoring at a family engagement night or provide I've seen lots of different options. Federal funding in food is not so easy to do. Light snacks maybe, but always clear that with me. Make sure I can get it reimbursed. But there are other ways to think imaginatively. I've seen quite a few districts print up stickers with QR codes that link to McKinney-Vento rights and enrollment forms, and I think that those are all great ways to increase awareness.
And I think I just want to add, Zach, the food piece, because I feel like that's always such a touchy one. It's like everybody needs to eat. Maybe there's a local restaurant or something, you know what I mean, that they're like, hey, we'd love to provide you all food, every few months, right? So again, thinking about what already exists, because so many people do want to support, right, especially families and students in crisis.
And we can, if a school has data to prove that food is necessary to get the families in, perhaps they've tried it with and without food before, that can be used to get some things covered. I'm always happy to take calls on that and advocate for you all with the leadership.
I just wanted to say again, I'm in a public space. I apologize. I just wanted to say again that your comment about coming together and educating people on McKinney-Vento. In Northern Kentucky, we worked with a storyteller coach, and it was right after COVID. Right? I don't know, but a couple years ago, we held an evening of hope. And so it was 8 districts that came together, and we all put in our money together so that someone paid for the advertisement, someone paid for the light hors d'oeuvres, someone paid for, and so we all came together, and that was amazing. Like, I'd love to have a bigger turnout. We must have had like 300-400 people. I have some colleagues on here. You can chime in if you'd like, but we told the stories, and one of them was from the liaison, one of them was from an unaccompanied youth. And another one was, a national speaker. Gosh, what was his name? Anthony White. He was the first tubist to get his doctorate, but he experienced homelessness when he was a child. So he wrote a book, and he's an author. And so he spoke as well. And I just loved it. And I think a lot of people did. But that was I think in Northern Kentucky, we do a really good job of that collaboration and trying to get people to understand what it is to be homeless as a student. And I say this to everybody when I make a presentation, is the first question I get asked by people when I'm standing in front of them and talking about McKinney-Vento and students experiencing homelessness. 9 times out of 10, someone will raise their hand and say, are they are you working with orphans? Because they can't imagine a family unit being homeless, right? They have to be without their parents if they're homeless. It's so interesting to me. And it's something that I've been doing this for 25, this is my 26th year, being with working in homelessness in schools. And it still to this day doesn't surprise me that people just don't get it. They don't get it.
Yeah,
So
no,
lots of work to do.
Thank you for that comment, Shelley. I really appreciate it. And that's something I think part of it too, and this is, I'm going to go back to the systematic piece, is how can teacher training programs also, right, better talk about McKinney-Vento? Because I think that's really, we do a really good job in teacher prep of IDEA and Title I, just so critical, important. But there's many teacher preparation programs that don't have McKinney-Vento as part of their curriculum. And then teachers and staff come into schools and they're like, McKinney, what? And so how can we also, I feel like there's some responsibility for the teacher preparation programs to better educate future teachers on what it is and how they can support their students. And it really is kind of a chicken and egg, right? Even though our focus is on the student, we know that if the family is struggling, that student's going to struggle. And so it's hard to parse out the student from their family. And so that's why we really want to think about this more holistic, collaborative. And again, schools can't do it all. How can we build those partnerships?
Yeah, I've made some inroads with some of the universities. I've been presenting to some teacher preparatory courses. I've done a few now, so I'm working on trying to hone the presentation and what they really need to know and what's interesting to them at that point. So I really hope to get a recorded version that I can send out to those that maybe can't give up an hour of course time just to share. So I'm glad you mentioned that because that's a growing interest area for me.
Well, and I think a similar one for EDD programs for future principals and superintendents would also be great. Like some of this work around the community mapping, the principal's going to decide what the theme of PD is going to be. And I found that like at the universities I've worked with, I've been able to kind of push my way in and get 30 minutes. And it's amazing how many a lot of students that are drawn to becoming K-12 educators had really positive experiences in K-12 and probably had a very different background than the students and the families we're talking about. So it was a really new idea for them. So yeah, I feel like this is a really key strategy. I'm glad you're already working on it.
I wanted to say something too from Covington Schools. I know it was very helpful. We had a person who was Melissa Farrell, who was before Zach, and she was able to provide me with the KRA and the KRS laws that tie to professional development. So I was able to present that to my staff and say, our leadership team, and say that it really needs to be on the vector trainings at the beginning of the school year. And I know this past year, I noticed it was cut back from the normal to about 5 minutes. And so I went back and said, this is a mandatory training and 5 minutes is not really going to cover what we really need. And we really need, and I shared that excerpt again of those laws, and that helps. So I think if there's any coordinators on here that are having trouble getting that out, because that is something that is now on our web. Well, it's included in our back to school trainings for all teachers. And I think that sets the tone. And then I still try to do one-on-ones, but I think that repetitive of constantly having it out there, and then those trainings are out there for them to go back to throughout the year. I think that helps as well.
Yeah, great points. Thank you.
Hey, Zach, this is Kevin. I'm in Owensboro. I'm on the teacher advisory committee with Kentucky Wesleyan. So if there's any information, if you want to send me, I'll definitely share with that group for the teacher education program.
Great, thank you. I'm ashamed to say even though I was an unaccompanied student, I wasn't, to my knowledge, identified at my school. I had to go back and get the verification once I got to college about what I had been through. And so I really didn't know a lot about McKinney-Vento until I was in my PhD program. And then my postdoc sort of led me here to this. And it's sort of been my mission to weasel my way into any of the teacher prep places that will have me, so that we can maybe, we may not fix it all, but we'll appear in front of as many pre-service teachers as we can. And I forgot to mention, the required amount of time to participate is over. If once you've filled out your feedback, this is just bonus time. And I've got about 10 more minutes that I can stay before I have to leave for Bullitt County.
Well, I just want to say one of the things that NKU does here is they actually bring those future teachers to us. And so one of their classes towards the end of their program is to meet with the Frisk, to meet with myself, and to meet with our health director, because in Erlanger, Ellesmere, we have a nurse in every school. And so just those support programs, the professor feels like it's important for those students to learn about them before they get into the classroom. And so, Zach, I'm thinking, we love it. We love for the students to come here and sit with us and ask questions and talk about what we do. So it might be something to add to that.
It's a great idea. Do we have anybody else with any questions or comments? Well, I want to thank you, Anne, for being here. This is so great. And I hope to be in touch in the future. This is definitely one of my favorite activities and topics within McKinney-Vento, but education in general. So thank you so much.
Thank you all. And I'm excited to hear all the work y'all are doing, and the fact that you're already like, oh, we can maybe add this or add that. And that's exactly what we want to promote and support, right? It's like, it doesn't have to be a big, event. It can be small things. And again, you all know so much better than us that those small pieces can make all the difference. So thank you for your time.
And the final webinar, I'm going to bring one final special guest with me. We're going to talk about how to increase access to higher education and other post-graduation opportunities for students. So I look forward to seeing you all next month.
Thank you. All right, I'll go ahead and end it there if nobody has any other questions.